Snow blew sideways around the old cabin as Lily stumbled to the wooden bench and froze at the sight of two half-frozen shepherd pups crusted in ice. I reached her a heartbeat later, arms burning as I scooped their rigid bodies up and felt the faintest flutter of life against my numb hands. Our quiet street held its breath while the storm pressed in, asking what kind of people we were going to be. To understand how we reached that winter bench, we have to go back to the calm mornings when our little street still felt ordinary. The first snow of December came in quiet, the kind that muffles engines and makes our little street sound like it is holding its breath. I sat at my kitchen table with my mug, watching the flakes drift under the street lamp. At my feet, Misty, my German shepherd, lay with her head on her paws, ears pricked toward the front door as if someone had knocked and I had missed it. She does that every winter, around this time, most mornings at 62. I like my routines slow and predictable. Kettle on, radio low, mail stacked in neat piles. Still, there are little things that refuse to stay still. The rug by the door is always nudged sideways, as though Misty keeps bracing against it in the night. Her water bowl wanders an inch at a time. A chewed tennis ball sits in the hallway like a tiny posted guard. The house feels watched. Our street isn't much. 12 houses, half of them ranch style. A few old cabins that went up before the bypass was finished. Folks decorate early here. By Thanksgiving, the porches glow with strings of warm light. This year, though, even the lights feel softer, like something is listening. Misty patrols the front window, nose smudges, tracing the glass. When tires crunch on snow outside, her tail lifts, then lowers when the car passes on. I told myself the restlessness was just age. After my wife passed, quiet could sound like a roar if I stared at it too long. Still, some evenings I find the back door unlatched, just a sliver, and snowflakes tracked in neat paw prints toward the porch rail. Misty will be sitting there, chest wide, staring toward the bend in the street where the road disappears into trees, as if waiting for a cue I cannot hear. It is the way she moves that bothers me most. Not nervous, not playful, but purposeful. She checks the back gate twice before coming in. She noses the woodpile stacked by the fence, circles the frost-silvered bird bath, and then plants herself near the hallway that faces the end of the cul-de-sac. That corner window looks straight toward the old cabin that sits apart from the rest of us, hunched under pines like it is listening. 2. Neighbours say Misty is just a shepherd doing shepherd things. They're wired to keep count. The clerk at the feed store told me with a knowing nod. Even when nothing's missing. But some nights, close to midnight, she stands rigid at the front door, every muscle lined with memory, and gives a low whine that prickles the back of my neck. It feels less like a warning and more like a reminder. Once, hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. Misty's ears flicked, and she exhaled a long, slow sigh, the kind that comes after a watch post has been relieved. I lay awake, listening to her breathing, feeling the past pressing against the walls like a slow-moving front of weather that had not entirely passed. By the first full week of snow, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Around 5 each afternoon, just as the early winter dusk began sliding down our street, Misty left whatever she was doing and padded to the front window. No command, no sound from outside, just some quiet bell that only she could hear. She would sit, ears forward, watching the bend in the road, waiting for something I could not name. I tried distracting her with her favourite rope toy, dropping it at her paws, jiggling it like I used to when she was a pup. She humoured me with a half-hearted tug, but her eyes kept cutting back to the glass. When I finally gave up and joined her, I saw only what I always saw. Mrs. Callahan's porch light clicking on, breath clouds from someone's chimney, and the dark shape of the old cabin down at the end, roofline buried in white. One Tuesday, as the sky flushed that bruised violet that only comes over snow, a figure appeared at the far end of the street. Misty's tail thumped once. I recognized the walk before I recognized the coat. Lily, the little girl who used to live 3 houses down, was no longer little. A teenager now, taller, with a long blonde braid falling out of her hat, shoulders carrying the weight of a backpack and something older. She trudged past my house, boots squeaking in the snow, a Christmas red scarf trailing. Misty gave a soft, urgent huff, then looked from Lily to me, eyes bright. I raised a hand in the window. Lily saw us, and for a flash her face broke into the same wide grin shed worn at 8. She lifted her hand back, then glanced toward the cabin at the end of the street. The smile thinned, something like a question crossing her face. Then she moved on. That night I found the old photo without meaning to, tucked between last year's tax forms and a recipe card in the kitchen drawer. 2 small German Shepherd puppies, still damp from the bath, were wrapped in a faded towel on my living room rug. Beside them, Lily, much smaller, cheeks pink from the cold, her hair in those lopsided braids she loved. Behind them, through the window, red and blue lights blurred against the falling snow. Holding the photo, I felt the memory before I could fully recall it, like a taste on the tongue before you remember the meal. Misty, in her crate then, was no more than a shivering bundle of fur, pressed against her brother, The kettle on the stove had been screaming. Someone had pounded on my door. Outside, the quiet cul-de-sac had been flooded with the soft growl of idling engines and the crackle of police radios. I put the picture down, my hand unsteady. In the present, Misty lay by the heater, watching me. Her eyes, so calm and intelligent, held a question I had never fully answered aloud. Why did the memory still feel unfinished? Why? Every winter, when the snow piled up and the porches bloomed with light, did she take up the same post by the window, facing the street where the cruisers had idled that long ago morning? The next afternoon, when Lily walked by again, she slowed in front of my house. Misty was already at the window. I opened the door before Lily could talk herself out of it. She stamped snow from her boots, eyes flicking past me into the hallway where Misty stood. She still does it? Lily asked, voice lower now, but with the same tremor. Watches the street like that? I nodded. The girl's gaze drifted toward the end of the road. I still hear that night sometimes when it's quiet. Her words, simple as they were, rang around my small kitchen as if someone had opened a door to a room I'd kept closed. After she left, Misty returned to the window. The cabin at the end of the street was just a dark shape under snow, but my chest had that old tightness again, the unsettled feeling that something back there was still on watch, waiting for its story to be told all the way through. Back then, before the puppies and the police cars, our winters felt longer. My wife had been gone 3 years, and I had retired from the county snowplows earlier than I'd planned after a slow slide on black ice rattled the last bit of courage out of me. Days had shapes measured in coffee refills and the sound of the mail slot. Nights stretched, wide and hollow, lined only by the ticking of the baseboard heaters. Lily and her parents had moved onto the street that fall, chasing cheaper rent and a quieter neighborhood. Her mother worked nights at the hospital. Her father took whatever construction jobs the season would allow. Lily was 8 and came home on the school bus with a backpack nearly as big as she was. She loved Christmas with a fierceness that startled me, sticking paper snowflakes on every window in their place, humming carols under her breath as she shoveled their small front walk. I watched all this from my porch more than I'll ever admit. The sight of that little girl in her red and white Santa-style coat, sweeping snow off her parents' steps with determined swipes, did something to the cold place where I kept my grief. Some evenings, when her father's truck was late, I would shovel the stretch of sidewalk between our houses for something to do. Lily would trot along behind me, stomping footprints into the clear path, chattering about school and the Christmas parade downtown. Even before the puppies, there were dogs in the background of that winter. A stray black lab that trotted the alley between our fences, leaving paw prints like small signatures in the fresh snow. occasional barking from down near the edge of town, where the houses thinned and the lots grew wider. The cabin at the end of the cul-de-sac stood empty then, its porch sagging, a for-lease sign listing in the frozen yard. But some nights, he'd swear I saw movement in its dark windows. At first, the townsfolk assumed raccoons or a fox had taken up residence near the cabin. Trash cans along the last 3 houses would be found tipped, lids rolled into the street. Once, Mrs. Callahan said she saw a pair of shining eyes at her fence line, tall enough to belong to a coyote. But the tracks in the snow told another story. Not cloven hooves, not delicate fox prints, but the wide, padded marks of a large dog pacing up and down behind the tree line, as if measuring the distance to something it could not yet approach. Money was tight for half our street that year. Layoffs at the mill had come early, and the storm that knocked out power for 2 days in November had blown half the shingles off 3 roofs. Folks patched what they could and promised to deal with the rest after the holidays. The mood was thin but determined. No one wanted extra mouths to feed, animal or otherwise. When Lily asked about getting a dog, her father's answer was as quick as it was tired. Not this year. Bug. We barely got the heating bill licked. Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. And folks spoke a little sharper at the hardware store about salt prices and propane. Rumours started floating about a man breeding shepherds out on a property near the highway, selling them cheap. No papers, no shots. I did not think much of it at the time. Gossip tends to collect in cold weather. I did not know yet how close that rumour would drive into our street, or how it would leave 2 tiny lives shivering on a wooden bench beneath the old cabin's eaves. By the time the hardest cold settled in, the kind that turns breath to steam the instant it leaves your lungs, I had fallen into a pattern of small kindnesses that were really for me as much as anyone else. A shovel of salt on the slickest patch near Lily's mailbox. An extra bag of dog food dropped at the shelter when I went to pay my license fees. It felt like tossing crumbs to the past. I did not understand that something just beyond our fence line was already watching, already circling closer, waiting for the moment snow and fear and hope would collide on one frozen night. The first intentional sign came on a windless afternoon, 2 days before the school holiday break. The sky was a pale, colourless lid, and the snow on the lawns had hardened into a crust that squeaked underfoot. I was bringing in groceries when I heard it. A thin, broken sound carried down the cul-de-sac. Not quite a bark, not quite a cry, but something caught between. Misty was not yet in my life then, but there was another presence, nearer than I knew. I stepped onto the porch, plastic bags digging lines into my fingers, and listened. The street sat still. Wreaths unmoving. Cars parked and dusted in white. Then I saw Lily at the far end, standing at the edge of the old cabin's yard. She had her red and white Santa coat on and no hat, blonde hair whipped across her face. Her mittened hand was extended, palm open, toward the shadow beneath the cabin's warped porch steps. Whatever was under there made that sound again, a tremulous whimper that pulled at something deep in my chest. I set the groceries down and walked toward them, boots crunching loud enough that Lily turned. Her eyes were wide, not with fear but with fierce concern. "Mr. Briggs," she called, voice careful not to scare whatever she was coaxing. "There's a dog under there." As I drew closer, I saw it. The outline of a German shepherd, ribs faint beneath a dull winter coat, eyes reflecting the weak daylight like twin embers. It did not growl. It did not move closer. It simply watched, breath fogging the cold air. "Stray from down by the highway. Maybe," I murmured, squatting slowly so we were all at the same level. Man, girl, and shivering dog. There was a cheap rope collar around its neck, frayed and too tight. Lily's mitten inched forward another fraction. "She's scared," Lily whispered. The pronoun was a guess, but something about the way the dog's body curved, protective and coiled, made it feel right. The whimper came again, quieter, as if the dog was refusing to ask for more than it deserved. I told Lily to stay back and went home for an old blanket and a bowl of water. By the time I returned, the dog had crept halfway out from under the porch, front paws in the light, eyes darting between Lily and the cabin door as if measuring escape routes. When I laid the blanket down and set the bowl just within reach, the dog's nose twitched. Then she stepped forward, tendon by tendon, to drink. Lily held her breath the entire time, cheeks flushed from the cold and the effort of staying perfectly still. We did not talk much about it to the others. I mentioned a stray near the cabin in passing to Lily's father that evening, but he just shook his head and muttered about folks dumping animals when times got tough. "We can't take in every sad pair of eyes on this street," he said, a voice tired but not unkind. Lily's face fell, but she did not argue. Instead, the next day, a small metal bowl appeared under the porch, filled with kibble from who knows where, and the blanket had been pulled deeper into the shadows. Over the next week, we saw the shepherd more often. She would appear at the tree line at dusk, watching children build crooked snowmen and race sleds down the shallow hill near the storm drain. Every time someone looked directly at her, she vanished, reappearing near the cabin, as if tethered to that sagging structure by some invisible line. The town's rumour mill continued humming about the breeder near the highway. But on our little street, this dog was no rumour. She was a presence, silent but deliberate. The day we noticed her belly, rounded beneath that rough coat, a different kind of worry settled over me. It was not obvious at first, hidden beneath the winter fluff. But as she moved, a new heaviness rolled beneath her ribs. She's going to have puppies. Lily breathed. Awe and fear braided into her voice. I felt the old ache in my chest sharpen. Another mouth, or several, arriving in the coldest part of the year, in a neighbourhood already stretched thin. The shepherd's eyes met mine for a brief, startling moment, and something like plea flickered there. That night, I lay awake listening for her. Wind pressed against the house, rattling the gutter. Somewhere, down past the last of the porch lights, a dog paced the yard of an empty cabin, circling an old bench and the shelter of cracked eaves. I did not know then how that bench, those eaves, and a little girl's stubborn heart would soon pull blue and red lights into our quiet street by the dozen. All I knew was that, for the first time in years, I was praying for someone else's strength as much as my own. The storm that set everything in motion arrived with no drama. Just a steady thickening of flakes that turned the world to paper and erased the edges of things. By mid-afternoon, the ploughs had not yet reached our cul-de-sac, and car tracks were already filling back in. The sky pressed low, and the air bit any exposed skin. Lily's school let out early, and kids spilled off the bus in clouds of breath before hustling toward their porches, pulled by hot chocolate and electric fireplaces. From my front window, I watched Lily pause at the mailbox, eyes drawn down the street toward the cabin. Even through the curtain, I could see her stiffen. She dropped her backpack on her own steps and set off, boots punching small holes in the fresh snow. Misty did not exist yet, but another shepherd form moved in parallel, a shadow near the tree line, pacing, then darting ahead of her, as if urging her on. A prickle of unease slid down my neck, and I grabbed my coat. By the time I reached my sidewalk, the cold had teeth. The wind funneled down the street, carrying with it a sound I had not heard before. A thin, high, desperate keening that sliced clean through the padding of snow. Lily was already halfway down the cabin's driveway, her red and white coat a bright streak against the grey. She glanced back once, caught sight of me, and then turned toward the cabin's side yard where the old wooden bench sat under a drift-heavy eave. I lost sight of her for a moment as the snow gusted. Then I rounded the bend and saw the scene that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Lily stood motionless by the bench. Mittened hands clapped over her mouth. On the weathered slats, two small mounds of fur huddled together, dusted in white. their forms so still I mistook them for forgotten hats. Then one mound shuddered, a weak tremor, and a faint whimper rose. My stomach dropped. They were German shepherd puppies, no more than 6 weeks old. Their fur clumped with ice, tiny whiskers crusted with frost. Their ears were still floppy, but their paws were already large, promising the size they would reach if they lived long enough. Icicles clung to the fur along their backs, where some melting had refrozen. Their eyes, when they forced them open, were dull with cold, not curiosity. Beneath the bench, scattered footprints and tire tracks scarred the otherwise smooth snow. Someone had left them there. The mother was nowhere in sight. No round belly, no watchful eyes near the porch. Only the faint, trampled path from the driveway to the bench, and then the wide gouge of a vehicle's retreat. Lily's voice tore out of her, a raw mix of fury and fear. Who would just leave them? She cried, already shrugging out of her Santa coat. I could not answer. The cold knifed through my own jacket as I lunged forward, hands reaching for the nearest pup. Its body was frighteningly rigid, but a weak heartbeat fluttered against my palm. Inside. Now, I said, though my house was several doors away, and Lily's even farther. Her father's earlier words about no dogs rang somewhere distant in my head. The cabin's door hung crookedly on its hinges, a padlock long rusted through. Well, take them to my place, I added, already picturing towels, hot water bottles, my old dog bed buried in the basement. But Lily shook her head sharply, eyes blazing. Dad will say no, she whispered. Hell say we can't afford it. They won't have a chance. Her gaze swung to the abandoned cabin. The wind gusted again, sending a curtain of snow sideways, stinging our faces. The puppies whimpered weakly, struggling to press closer to one another, their tiny bodies shivering in uneven waves. My breath puffed out in harsh clouds as I gathered them, one under each arm, their frozen fur burning my bare wrists. We don't have time to argue about adults, I said, panic sharpening my words. They need warmth now. But Lily had already made some internal leap I could see only in the set of her jaw. She grabbed my sleeve, eyes fierce. Let me hide them, she pleaded. Just for tonight. Well, warm them up. And then we'll figure it out. Please, Mr. Briggs. Please. Her gaze flicked toward the bend in the road, where the world beyond our small street lay unseen. Somewhere out there was the source of those tire tracks and that frayed rope collar. Somewhere out there, someone had decided these two lives were not worth the trouble of a proper goodbye. The cold pressed heavier around us, as if waiting for our decision. I wish I could say I made the brave, clean decision in that moment. But the truth is, it was Lily who moved first. While I hesitated, juggling the weight of the half-frozen pups and the imagined weight of her father's disappointment, she darted to the cabin's back door. Years of disuse had left the lock brittle. One sharp kick with her boot and it splintered, the door swinging inward to reveal a dim, dust-scented space lined with old crates and a narrow, snow-dusted cot. Here, she called softly, already spreading her Santa coat on the cot like a banner. I carried the puppies inside, the sudden stillness of the cabin swallowing the howl of the wind. My breath billowed in the faint light from the single grimy window. Even in the gloom, the contrast was stark. Her red and white coat glowing against the grey, and atop it, the two small shepherds, their fur mottled with frost, eyes slitted in exhausted confusion. The air smelled of old wood and cold metal, but under it all, the faint, hopeful scent of warm dog. We worked wordlessly. I rubbed their legs and paws, careful but firm, coaxing circulation back into stiff limbs. Lily cupped their muzzles in her hands, breathing on them, murmuring nonsense words that nonetheless carried a steady, reassuring tone. One pup let out a faint sneeze, then a tiny, indignant squeak. The other blinked slowly, lashes rimed in ice, and nosed weakly toward Lily's wrist. Relief hit me so hard I had to sit down on a crate. "You can't tell your dad yet," I said, finally, my voice rough in the close air. "Not until they're stronger. Hell think with his bills, not his heart. Has got to. That's his job." Lily nodded, though her eyes flashed with hurt. "So we hide them," she said, as if the idea had been fully formed long before this storm. "Just for a night. It's not lying if it's to give them a chance." She looked up at me, testing to see if I would agree to carry this thin, fragile secret. Outside, a distant engine downshifted, then faded. Somewhere in town, life went on according to schedule. Ovens preheating, lights flicking on, traffic inching along the ploughed main road. In the cabin, time narrowed to the rise and fall of two tiny chests against a red coat. I found an old battery lantern on the shelf and clicked it on. Its cold, bluish light washed over Lily's braid, the pup's slowly relaxing muscles, and the frost feathers on the inside of the window. It made our hidden scene feel like a photograph already, waiting to be developed. As we worked, the meaning of the tracks outside began to take sharper shape in my mind. The stories about the backyard shepherd breeder near the highway, the frayed rope collar on the mother dog, the way she had paced our cul-de-sac for weeks, never straying far from the cabin. She was trying to show us, I murmured, more to myself than to Lily. She brought them as close as she dared, then stayed on watch until someone finally listened. The puppies twitched, perhaps dreaming of a warmth they had not yet fully known. Lily followed my gaze to the window. Through the fogged pane, we could just make out the shape of the bench and the faint path of paw prints circling it, leading back toward the trees. No mother dog stood there now, but I felt her presence as surely as if she had been leaning against the door. We can't just keep this a secret, I said slowly. Whoever left them, they might have other litters, other dogs, out there in worse shape. We need help. My hand went to my pocket where my phone sat, suddenly heavy. Her shoulders slumped, fear and responsibility colliding on her small frame. They'll take them, she whispered. The police, the shelter, someone. And what if that man comes back? What if he sees the cars and gets mad? The lantern's blue light caught the tear tracks on her cheeks, thin and shining. I remembered being 8 and believing adults could fix things without letting anything break first. I wished I could promise her that now. Instead, I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, careful not to jostle the pups. We're not calling to give them away, I said gently. We're calling to make sure whoever did this can't do it again. And we won't leave these two alone. Not for a second. They'll hear about the little girl who hid them and the old man who backed her up. And they'll come with more cars than you've ever seen on this street. Because it won't just be about 2 puppies. It'll be about all the ones she tried to warn us about. In the end, it was Lily who dialed. Her hands shook, but her voice steadied as she told the dispatcher about the bench, the tire tracks, the half-frozen pups inside the old cabin. She even mentioned the mother dog who had been circling our cul-de-sac for weeks, describing her markings as best she could. When she hung up, the silence in the cabin felt different. Not empty, but expectant. The pups, warmer now, had curled into one another, breathing slow and deep. We sat there, side by side on the creaking cot, listening. First came the faint wail of a siren, distant and thin. Then another, closer, harmonizing with the first. Misty, years later, would still lift her head whenever that sound echoed down our street. But on that night, as blue and red reflections finally began to flicker off the ice on the window, Lily reached for my hand. "Do you think they'll be mad at me?" she asked. I squeezed back. "I think they'll line this street with cars to thank you," I said. Morning light over fresh snow has a special kind of quiet to it, as if the world is waiting to see who will be brave enough to make the first mark. That day, the marks came in the shape of tire tracks and boot prints. When I stepped onto my porch just after dawn, the cul-de-sac looked like a scene from a movie set. 3 police cruisers, a county truck, and the animal control van, all lined along the curb, engines humming clouds into the cold. Neighbours stood on their porches in robes and winter coats, coffee mugs steaming in their hands. The usual small-town chatter that accompanies any excitement was hushed, replaced by the crackle of radios and the subdued murmur of officers moving from house to house, asking questions. Lily's father, jaw tight, spoke with a tall sergeant near his mailbox. Lily stood beside him, chin lifted, her red coat zipped all the way up. Misty did not yet exist, but in my chest, something loyal and alert had awakened. The officers were kinder than I had feared. They knelt to check the pups, now in proper blankets in the back of the van, murmuring soft praise as one tried to chew the edge of a stethoscope. You bought them a few extra decades. Kiddo, one officer told Lily, straightening up with a smile that melted her father's scowl a fraction. Another officer traced the tire tracks with a practiced eye, nodding as they matched the tread pattern to a description from a previous call. The rumour of the breeder past the highway was no longer just a rumour. In the days that followed, the story spread through town the way stories do. People spoke of that little girl on Maple Court who had followed a stray dog silently and dragged a reluctant old neighbour into a chilly cabin to save 2 dying pups. They spoke of how the police used the description of the truck and the plate number Lily had scrawled on her mitten in the dark to finally get a warrant. They spoke, too, of how thin those pups had been, and how hard their tiny bodies had shivered. Life on our street didn't transform overnight, but it shifted. Lily's father, who had once said a hard no to extra mouths, started taking on odd weekend jobs at the hardware store. Just enough to cover what the shelter can't. As he put it, when the pups needed follow-up care, I found myself down at the shelter more often, fixing hinges, repairing a broken kennel door, drinking terrible coffee while those 2 shepherd pups slept in a shared crate, their paws twitching through dreams layered with sirens and lantern light. When the time came for adoption, the staff didn't even pretend to look surprised when I filled out the paperwork. You can't separate partners like that night, the director said, nodding toward Lily and me. And you definitely can't separate these 2. We worked out a compromise. 1 pup with me, 1 with Lily's family. Daily visits, guaranteed by the fact that our porches faced each other across the snow. We named them Misty and Ranger, for the weather and the way they had patrolled our memories even before we knew their names. New rhythms arrived like new snowfalls, gentle but persistent. Morning coffees now included a shepherd head nudging my elbow. More often than not, Lily on my porch, steps before school, Ranger dancing in circles at the end of his leash. Our quiet street, once just an address, became a route the police cruisers took a little more often. Officers slowing to lift a hand to the girl who had given their case a face. Misty watched them go every time. Ears forward, eyes tracking the disappearing lights. Years passed, and still, every winter, when the first fall storm settled in and the holiday decorations blinked on, Misty would take up her post at the window, watching the bend in the road. Lily grew taller, traded braids for messy buns, and eventually car keys. But some nights, she would still stop by after dinner, pressing her forehead against Misty's, whispering secrets I did not need to hear. The dogs, who once shivered on a frozen bench, now sprawled on warm rugs, snoring loud enough to rattle the baseboards. Our street, once lined with police cars for a terrible reason, became a place we all watched over together. Now, when snow begins to fall in the slow, steady way that promises it is here for the long haul, I find myself back at the window with Misty. She is greying around the muzzle these days, her movements slower, but her eyes are as bright as the morning the cruisers first lined our street. She still rises at the faintest sound of a siren, not with panic, but with a calm, alert curiosity, as if checking that help is on its way for someone else's cold night. Lily is off at community college in the next town, studying to be a vet tech. On weekends, she comes home smelling faintly of antiseptic and puppy breath. She always stops here first, dropping her bag and sinking to the floor as Misty noses every pocket, searching for hidden treats or new stories. Ranger, a little slower in the hips, often follows, leaning his weight against my legs while we listen to Lily talk about the animals she sees and the people who bring them through the doors. Sometimes, when the conversation dips and the only sounds are the ticking heater and the dog's contented sighs, we remember that night in the cabin. Lily laughs at how small her coat must have been, how bossy she must have sounded ordering me around. I confess how scared I was to make the wrong call, how much I leaned on a child's stubborn heart to do the right thing. The memory no longer carries the sharp chill it once did. It feels, instead, like a lantern we lit together, still casting a quiet glow. The old cabin at the end of the street has been fixed up now, rented to a young couple who string their own lights along the porch every December. They know the story, everyone who lives here learns it eventually. On clear nights, they leave a bowl of water by the bench, just in case any ghosts with wet noses drift by. They say, Misty sometimes pauses there on our slow walks, sniffing the air, tail giving one small wag, as if greeting an old guardian who finally got to rest. I look at her, this dog who began her life barely breathing on a frozen bench, and at the girl who refused to let that be the end of the story. And I feel the house, the street, the whole small town settle into a deeper kind of quiet. Not the hollow silence I once feared, but a full, watchful peace. I rest my hand on Misty's back, feeling her steady warmth, and whisper, as much to myself as to her, I'm glad we found each other. I'm not alone anymore. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.